Till now, we saw how the United States of America entering the Second World War alongside the German surrender after the Battle of Stalingrad tipped the scales in the favor of the Allied powers. The Allied powers persisted this and made sure that they can get all the lost territories from Germany. They also managed to defeat Italy and impose a new government there. Finally, they were able to launch a full-scale invasion of Germany and made Germany surrender. That brought the Second World War to an end, but only in Europe. The 8th of May was celebrated as the VE Day, or the Victory in Europe Day, and all around the world, many cities had many rallies. But the end of war in Europe was not the end of the Second World War, as the war was still left on the other side of the world. The Second World War truly came to an end when Japan, the last major Axis power, surrendered after the US dropped 2 atom bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That brings us to discussion on the final chapter as well as the deadliest one of the Second World War. Let us now look at this grim incident in detail and see how the Second World War came to an end. But why was the atom bomb, or for that matter of fact, 2 atom bombs, dropped on Japan? Well, while the European theater of the Second World War was the major theater where all the major battles took place, Japan, a very important Axis power, was not present in the European theater. See, Japan was involved on the Far Eastern theater of the war. The Far Eastern theater comprised of South Asia as well as the Pacific region. Now, if you remember, Japan had a mighty ambition to make an empire comprising of the entirety of South Asia as well as to exert control over the Pacific region. In this, Japan had a major enemy, the US. And if you remember, US entered the Second World War after the Japanese attack on the Pearl Harbor base. Now, Japan was continuing with its expansions, and in fact, it was able to realize a segment of its big dream of creating a South Asian empire. By the year 1942, Japan was able to create an empire comprising of Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, Malaya, Burma, the Manchurian province of China, among other South Asian territories, and it was still continuing. Now, if you remember, by 1942, the Axis powers already were having a hard time because the US had entered the Second World War on the Western Front. But Japan was not bothered by the various defeats as well as the falling back of its other Axis allies, Germany and Italy. Japan was continuing in its expansions and was leading the Axis fight on its own on the Far Eastern Front of the Second World War. Even after Germany and Italy surrendered, Japan did not seem to be much bothered by it, and in fact, it continued with its aggressive expansion as well as its resistance against America or US in the Pacific region. Now, the United States of America was also not holding back. They could not allow Japan to consolidate so much in a region that was literally their backyard. And therefore, US continued to resist the Japanese attacks as well as their aggressive expansionism. After Italy and Germany surrendered in the Second World War, USA had a feeling that Japan too would now surrender. After all, how could Japan continue the fight on its own? But Japan, as you know, continued in its activities unbothered, and therefore USA was forced to launch a Japanese offensive in which the US Navy managed to damage the entirety of the Japanese fleet. You can see some instances of a popular movie called Midway, which demonstrates one such offensive, the Battle of Midway, where USA was able to take out a majority of the Japanese fleet. Many such battles took place in the Japanese offensive in which USA was able to completely cripple the navy of Japan. Now, Japan is a seafaring nation, and seafaring nations rely entirely on their navies. And when the navy of a seafaring nation normally goes away, it is time for the surrender. However, in the case of Japan, that logic did not work. You see, the Japanese were not at all ready to surrender. This is because their culture thinks of surrender as the lowest form of defeat, and the Japanese would rather have their soldiers die in battle than to surrender. But the primary reason why the Japanese were so insistent on not surrendering is because while their navy was completely done with, they still were having a majority holding in the mainland because their soldiers or their army was still very much present in the mainland, and this was giving them confidence to continue with its expansions and to continue resisting surrender. The Allied nations, particularly USA, made repeated attempts to make Japan surrender, and in fact also gave Japan an ultimatum that if they do not surrender, they would be destroyed, and ultimate threats of destruction were put upon Japan. But even those threats were of no use. Now, USA at this point had enough. They wanted the Second World War to come to an end, and that would not happen until Japan surrenders. In fact, USA had a personal stake in making the Japanese surrender. So if you remember, USA entered the war with the sole intention of crippling the Japanese. Therefore, USA came up with an ultimate solution to deal with the Japanese once and for all and to also end the war immediately. And that solution was the atom bomb. USA introduced the atom bomb to the Allies to defeat Japan and to put an end to the Second World War. You can see the first generation of the atom bomb which USA came up with. Now, the concept of an atom bomb had existed for a long time, but this had been a theory. What is this theory? The theory involves the construction of a deadly weapon employing the science of nuclear fission, which would cause a chain reaction capable enough of generating unprecedented amounts of energy, which would cause a huge explosion and, of course, destruction and damage beyond comprehension. Now, this was just a theory, but before the start of the Second World War, a rumor spread that the Nazis were constructing their own atom bomb and the Allies were threatened, and therefore they knew that they also have to come up to speed. Now, for that purpose, the Manhattan Project was set up by the Allies. It was a research and development program led by USA with the support of UK and Canada, and it was the Manhattan Project which gave the world its first nuclear weapons, because atom bombs are just a form of nuclear weapons employing technology of nuclear fission or fusion. You can see the panel of scientists who led the Manhattan Project, and out of their brains came the first atom bomb. This atom bomb is what became America's ultimate response to deal with Japan and to end the Second World War. It was the early morning on the 6th of August 1945 in the city of Hiroshima in southwest Japan. The people were getting ready to start off their day, but then they heard a distant buzzing in the sky. They looked up to see an American plane flying over them. Now, this was not an unusual sight, as American planes often used to fly over Japan to run surveillance missions. But as the plane came closer, the people observed that it is not a surveillance aircraft but a bomber. Suddenly, the bomber dropped one big bomb over the city. Before the people could realize or respond to what was happening, the bomber dropped a bomb over the city. Suddenly, the entire city was covered in a white light. It was as if the sun itself had descended down on the city of Hiroshima. And then came the explosion. A mushroom cloud emerged over the city, and this was visible from miles away. What happened over here? Well, you see, USA dropped its first atom bomb on Hiroshima on this day. This bomb was nicknamed Little Boy. However, the impact it left behind was far from little. Around 3 lakh people were killed in an instant, and to say that the bombing caused damage would be an understatement, as the entire city was vaporized and buildings disappeared altogether. Can we imagine how disastrous this bombing was? Can you answer this question? What was the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima named? Was it little boy, little girl, fat man, or fat woman? The correct answer is little boy. The bombing of Hiroshima shook the entire nation of Japan and perhaps the entire world itself. In fact, the US president was very clear as to what lay ahead for Japan if they did not surrender. This New York Times article comments that the bomb that was dropped on Japan is equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. That was the intensity of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Now, Japan must have surrendered after this, right? They did not, because Japan felt that USA only had one atom bomb, which they dropped on Hiroshima, and now they can continue with their expansions. But they were mistaken. Therefore, they continued to put off surrender as they felt that USA does not have the potential or the resources to carry something out like this on Japan yet again. But they were badly mistaken. When Soviet Russia saw that Japan did not surrender even after the bombing of Hiroshima, they felt that it is a good opportunity for them to intervene and to be the power which would bring Japan on their knees and therefore end the Second World War. That is why the Soviets launched an invasion of Japan when it refused to surrender. The USA did not like the invasion of Japan, as the Soviets, who were the ideological rivals of USA, were leading this invasion. And if it succeeded, then it would be Soviet Russia who would bring the war to an end. The second reason why USA did not prefer the invasion is because it felt that the invasion of Japan at a time when it's not ready to surrender is simply a waste of time and would only prolong the war further instead of ending it quickly. But the most important reason is because USA wanted to be the power which would bring Japan down on its knees because it wanted to exact revenge for what was done at Pearl Harbor. That is why USA pressed the red button yet again. On 9th August 1945, exactly 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima, USA dropped another atom bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki, nicknamed the Fat Man. The Fat Man had a similar amount of damage and destruction. This bomb was as destructive as the last one that was dropped on Hiroshima, and it managed to kill about 180,000 people in an instant. This bombing was the straw that broke the camel's back. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki no doubt caused unprecedented amounts of damage, destruction, and death. In fact, the rate of death and destruction, which countless months of conflict of the Second World War could not cause, was caused in an instant due to these bombings. You can see some instances of such destruction and death. Here you see a few sad glimpses of the death and destruction caused by these bombings. On the left you see the city of Hiroshima being left in rubble after the bombing. On the right you see the remains of a child after the bombing in Nagasaki. So you can understand the death and destruction was at an unprecedented scale. And this caused immense political instability in Japan because the Japanese public no longer wanted the Second World War to continue. Far gone was the ambition of having an empire in South Asia and Pacific. Now the only aim the Japanese public had was to survive because every single day they woke up, they thought that their city might be the next. So such amounts of destruction, death and political instability in Japan after the bombings made the future of Japan clear. The sun was about to set on the land of the rising sun. Japan finally surrendered to the Allies on 15th August 1945. Over here you can see the Japanese Prime Minister signing the declaration of surrender in the presence of the American General MacArthur, who was given the responsibility of controlling Japan till a new government is formed. And as you can see in the newspaper article, the Japanese surrender ended the war. Therefore, on 15th August 1945, after the Japanese surrender to the Allies, the Second World War officially came to an end. Therefore, the deadliest and perhaps the most devastating conflict in human history got its poetic ending in the form of perhaps the most devastating event in this century. So the Second World War finally came to an end. But the question still lingers, at what cost? There must be a bunch of consequences left behind by the Second World War. And that would be a topic of our discussion in the next lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step by step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.